Well, welcome to New York Energy Week's Energy Storage Roundtable. My name is Erin Carson, and I am the Senior Analyst with EnerKnol, the tech firm behind New York Energy Week. And on behalf of the entire EnerKnol team, I want to personally thank you for joining us here this morning and to acknowledge everyone in this room. This room is full of industry leaders, very busy, and we're so thankful to have you here. Your presence really makes a difference. So if you are on Twitter, you can please join in the discussion using our New York Energy Week hashtag NYEW. And for those of you who we haven't met yet, EnerKnol provides energy policy data and research on regulations and legislation across all of the different energy sectors. And you can test drive our software and pick up a sample of our research at our demo booth. We launched New York Energy Week last year to bring together a collaboration of thought leaders from across all of the different energy sectors. And last year, in our inaugural year, we had about 2,000 participants. And this year, it looks like we've about doubled that so far this week. So amazing involvement. So before we get started, I would like to thank our founding partner, NYSERDA, our brand partner, the Energy Agency, and this year's Terawatt sponsors, Breitling Energy and Con Edison, and our Megawatt sponsors, Fiamm and American Vanadium, and our board of directors, Kristen Barbado, Kate Burson, Rory Christian, Peter Gardette, Carolyn Kassan, and Adam Smith. Of course, our steering committee, including Stephen Lichten and Leonardo Lanzetta, and the many others who helped make this event a possibility and this whole week a success. Of course, a special thank you to our event host, the Urban Future Lab, whose leadership in energy entrepreneurship is really evidenced by having all of you, the leaders in this industry, here today for our official 2014 Energy Storage Roundtable event. So just a few words of policy backdrop as we get started. As we know, energy storage is an enormous emerging market. A few months ago, a bicameral task force on climate change in Congress issued a report citing that over the next 10 years, the U.S. market demand for energy storage for renewable energy is likely to increase to more than 36,000 megawatts. And by the year 2022, that the worldwide market for energy storage will exceed $40 billion a year. And we have seen some federal initiatives to spur on this development, including legislation and some regulations. Of course, with regulation, we had last year's Energy Storage Act introduced by Representative Gibson of New York. It's a bipartisan bill, and we could likely see some movement out of the Ways and Means Committee, probably after the November midterm elections. And then also, earlier this month, we had EPA's draft rulemaking to cut 30% of the 2005 greenhouse gas emission levels by the year 2030. And now, while that regulation does specifically address standing sources and power plants, it also does indirectly impact energy storage. As electricity generators shift the portfolio of their, as they shift their portfolio to meet those new standards, it really will incentivize demand for energy efficient technologies, including energy storage. And then we also have grant initiatives from agencies like the Department of Energy. And for those of you who are here this morning at the Women's Breakfast, we also heard from Dr. Cheryl Martin that ARPA-E just this morning announced $33 million in additional funding for fuel cell projects. So there's opportunities at that level as well. So there are efforts being made in Washington through some of these avenues, but I think we've all seen that the real driving momentum is happening at the state and local levels. And that's what makes events like this one here at New York Energy Week so exciting and important. So we're excited to hear from our panel today about advances in developing cost-effective utilities and ensuring resiliency in the power supply. We're especially interested in understanding how to facilitate energy storage technologies that are market competitive at the commercial level, how to address market rules such as backup power and putting a value on resiliency, and regulations and policies that accommodate variations in different regions and markets, like dense urban environments like New York, that have specific building codes and fire regulations that you might not see in other parts of the country. So first, to kick us off, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Emily Wheeler, the Deputy Director of NYC ACRE, and also David Guilford, the Vice President of the New York City Economic Development Corporation. Thank you. We look forward to a great panel.
Thank you, Erin. On behalf of the entire team here at the Urban Future Lab, I'd like to welcome you to the Energy Storage Roundtable. I hope you've enjoyed the views in this space while you've been here, and of course none of this would be possible without the continued support of our great sponsors, NYSERDA, NYC, EDC, National Grid, ADT, and Empire State Development. We've been especially excited to host this event because we've had an increased focus on storage and the grid. This year, we focused our Clean Energy Connections event series, which is our partnership with Green Tech Media and Solar One, on the grid edge, and our last event in May was the Age of Intelligent Storage, which had great discussions on distributed systems and controls. We also have many companies here in the space that are focused on storage, including one who you'll hear from today, which is Smarter Grid Solutions, and another is Voltaic, and Tall if you're in the crowd in the back there. And Voltaic is changing the way that batteries are developed and used, so find Tall after the panel and he can give you a demo of the technology. And also, if you'd like a tour of the space, or you'd like to hear more about it, happy to give you a tour, so find me or Amy or Harris or anyone who's working here, and they'd be happy to show you around. And now from one of our great sponsors, David Guilford.
Thanks, Emily. So the chance to talk about energy storage today, I think, is very appropriate, both in terms of the time on the last day of New York Energy Week, as well as the place. Here we are overlooking so much of New York City's infrastructure. This is really an exciting time for energy storage, and I come from the perspective of the city government. So I'm a vice president of the Economic Development Corporation, and we see energy storage as an important opportunity for two major reasons. One is it can help reduce some of the costs that businesses and all New Yorkers pay in terms of maintaining our infrastructure, ensuring reliable power. And all of us who lived through Hurricane Sandy certainly understand the value of having more reliability in the grid and greater storage. But second, and perhaps even more importantly, this is an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity for companies to form, such as the companies that are here in the Urban Future Lab. There's a big jobs component of installing energy storage, of the project finance that comes along with it, of every aspect of the value chain. And we as the city have been trying to do our part to help create this emerging market. We've been using some of our city's own buildings as a way to demonstrate and test technologies. So my team personally worked on a project at the Brooklyn Army Terminal, which is a 100-year-old building. It's an historic building, 4 million square feet. Probably one of the toughest places to put energy storage in for a number of reasons, but we were able to do it, and we were able to, as of May 1st, have a commercial system that's operating and participating in demand response programs from both NYSO and Con Ed, and really bringing a historic part of New York City's economy from the 20th century into the 21st. So I think that as we do these projects, the key value is not one individual project from the city's perspective, but is how does this build momentum and how does this help remove barriers? So I think this sort of discussion that we're going to have here today is really critical in that, in sharing both the successes and great progress that we've made, as well as looking at some of the challenges that remain. So thank you all for being here and for your support of this important new industry in New York City. And I'd now like to turn it over to Stephen Lichten, the steering committee. Thanks.
Thanks, David and Emily, and thank you, Emily, and the rest of the Urban Future Lab for hosting this event. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steve Lichten, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Stasis Energy. 2 years ago, I founded a project development and software development startup to use energy storage to tackle a lot of the problems we're going to discuss today. So obviously, this is quite near and dear to my heart, and I had the privilege of chairing the event for New York Energy Week. The idea behind today's panel was to have an open and honest discussion about the policy that's actually driving energy storage development today. Frequency regulation, renewable integration, peak load reduction. These are some of the things that are well suited for energy storage to tackle. And I hope, but the real question is there current policy and market structures that are actively getting this technology in the ground? These are the points I hope we get to dig into today, and I think we have a great moderator for that. Our moderator today is John Charbonnet from New York Best. He is the Director of Resource Development, where he leads efforts to make connections between and among members, funding sources, and community at large. And prior to New York Best, he served many leadership roles in clean tech startups in New York State. So help me welcome John Charbonnet. Thank you.
I have to take my word for it. My name tag just fell. Hi, I'm John Charbonnet. I'm Thank you, Steve, and let me offer a word of thanks to everyone who had a hand in organizing today's event and bringing people together. I think the turnout in this room is strong testament to just the increased focus and the opportunities that are on the table in front of us for energy storage. Whether you talk behind the meter in a building, on the grid, or in vehicles, storage is kind of everywhere around us and getting more by the day. Steve mentioned a number of the drivers, things that are going on globally. And if you look at things, and actually earlier we mentioned the EPA regulations for carbon. So there are a number of significant drivers that are pointing increasingly towards storage solutions. And I'm pleased to say that there's been traction on a lot of those fronts in New York State and in the city. And we certainly support that and advocate for policies that will help implement those things, those projects. One of the things that's interesting, New York ISO, the operator for the New York bulk power grid, issued a report yesterday that it's basically an energy report. What's the state of energy in the state of New York? And in the last 6 months, we set not one, but two new energy records, peak records, both summer and winter peaks. New overall peak was in July 2013, and January, the winter peak also occurred. And the interesting piece of this is, while the peaks are increasing, the actual energy consumption has stayed flat or actually slightly decreased. That's not uncommon across the country. So that situation where the peak demand really is driving a lot of infrastructure requirements, investment, and programs to address that peak, to try to get people to reduce peak consumption, are really taking hold and are becoming a very strong fixture in the landscape. So I think that'll certainly be part of our conversation. We've got a great panel here to discuss that and other pieces. Let me just give you a couple of words about New York BEST. You may not all know. New York BEST is the New York Battery and Energy Storage Technology Consortium. We are an independent, not-for-profit based in Albany, New York, originally funded by New York State. The state of New York invested $25 million to create New York BEST back in 2010. And most of that funding, we work very closely with NYSERDA, so we support a number of projects related to energy storage, from R&D to deployment and demonstration projects. So we've put about $15 million back out in the street into projects all over the state. We also maintain an office and staff. We run meetings throughout the year, really focused around the issues related to driving policy, to helping technologies move from the lab to the marketplace, all related to energy storage. So you can think of us in many ways as an economic development arm of New York, focused strictly on a set of technologies, all focused on energy storage. So that's who we are. With us today, we have a great panel, and I'll do a quick introduction, but I'm also going to ask them to introduce themselves. Choi from Fiamm, Energy Storage Solutions. He supports their business development and marketing of the sodium nickel chloride energy storage system, and has worked in sectors including utilities, military, UPS, residential, and automotive. Jay has strong expertise in sodium nickel chloride, lithium ion, large format lithium technology, and has led efforts related to renewable backup systems and hybrid systems using DMFCs for a microgrid. Chelle, Izzi, leads commercialization of behind-the-meter storage for Constellation. Constellation is an Exelon company. She transitioned to storage after a decade of creating, commercializing, and selling demand response in energy efficiency products. She previously ran load response technology alliance teams for Constellation and built C-Power's national account and UK business before it was acquired by Constellation. Next, we have pinch hitting. I know Bill Radbeck, and you're not him. This is Brian Beck with American Vanadium. Brian is Vice President for Sales for American Vanadium, a flow battery company that has a relationship with Gildemeister, a German company that produces a flow battery system. Brian's been with the company for about a year, I think, and has prior experience before that with another flow battery initiative, so has a wealth of experience there. And then finally, on the end, Bob Currie is CTO at Smarter Grid Solutions, and he's the one that's closest to his normal place of work, which is right across the way here. Says here, Bob's an innovative engineer and is widely recognized as an authority on active network management and smart grids. So I think given the span of technologies and the places where these systems fit on the grid or in buildings and the ability to control these systems, we really have a good opportunity to dive into some of the issues that are moving to the forefront around storage. So the way this will work, I've got some questions prepared. And actually, before we do that, why don't you go ahead and if you want to just add anything to your backgrounds, Jay, if you want to start, and just give a minute or two.
Just hold the mic. Hello, everyone. Oh, it's too loud. Sorry. My name is Choi. It is my pleasure to be here today. I'm a product application manager at Fiamm. Fiamm was established in 1942 in Italy. Ever since then, we have been manufacturing lead-acid batteries for startup battery applications for automobiles and also UPS applications, generating 500 million euro per year in average. And it's going up, and it's going to go up rapidly, hopefully, next year with our chemistry for storage application. So we acquired Zebra technology about 4 years ago. Ever since then, we have been focusing storage application with this technology. It is my pleasure to be here. I'm an engineer, actually. Please stop me anytime if I get to be too technical.
Thanks, John, and thanks to the EnerKnol team. My name's Chelle, Izzi, and I'm with Constellation. Just a couple words about Constellation and Exelon. So you might know Constellation as a retail supplier. We supply about 100,000 C&I businesses, 2/3 of the Fortune 500, as well as 1 million residential customers. You may not know that we're owned by Exelon, and Exelon is one of the largest generating fleets in the country, and also owns a few utilities and is in the process of acquiring a few more. So that's the parent company. Why that's relevant is between the retail and the generation and the distribution business, we are looking at distributed generation very seriously, and the retail business, Constellation, has recently launched a distributed generation business, and that's what I'm doing now. So I am very new to my role. I moved into this in March. The business was launched or approved in January, and we are still building up this business, which is why my title is Commercialization, because it is not yet a business. But I come to this having built up the demand response industry, and so pretty experienced on new markets, new products, and getting people to take the leap into a brave new world. So I am not an engineer, but I've worked with a lot of customers and helped them adopt new technologies.
Okay, I'll use this one. Thank you. Well, as John said, I'm pinch hitting for Bill Radbeck. American Vanadium is an integrated energy storage company, and the reason I'm in town this week is that we have going through some review processes with the New York City Department of Buildings. You may have seen our press activity in the last few weeks. We have a project at the MTA building in number 2 Broadway. That's an interesting place to put vanadium redox technology, and we're going through a review process, which is very interesting. And I happened to walk in the back of the room and got summoned by an executive order to come and sit up here. Nice to be here.
Hello everyone. Yes, I'm Bob Currie from Smarter Grid Solutions, and I sit just outside the door here, so I feel like I should say welcome to the Urban Future Lab as well. We're a technology provider. We provide distribution utility companies with control systems to help them integrate more distributed energy resources. So we've done a lot of work with wind and solar, and inevitably energy storage has come to play a big part in that. So we're a UK business. In the UK, we are currently controlling batteries of various sizes, 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt. But we also do thermal energy storage management as well. So we're controlling hot water tanks and things like that. We just came to the US 7 or 8 months ago and found our feet here in the Urban Future Lab. So I'm in the fortunate position of having the people in the company that are smarter than me at the back of the room, so I can refer any difficult questions to them perhaps. But I'm very happy to be here and be part of this, so thank you.
Thank you. So I think we'll start with a discussion around the recently announced demand management program that Con Edison and NYSERDA have partnered around providing incentives for peak demand reduction that is funded as a consequence of Con Edison filing a contingency plan in the event of the closure of Indian Point nuclear plant up the river. So as part of that plan that was filed with the Public Service Commission and approved, there's a requirement to opportunity for 100 megawatts of demand reduction, peak summer demand reduction that can be achieved through energy efficiency, through demand response, and energy storage. And importantly, in order to implement that program and to really drive some activity, Con Ed and NYSERDA partnered to put together a program where $2,100 per kilowatt incentive for installed energy storage, battery storage systems, and $2,600 per kilowatt for thermal storage systems. And I know a number of your companies have looked at this, and you know, some of the technologies are more appropriate or not for behind-the-meter kind of activity, because that's really where this is focused. It's all about customer side of the meter, putting systems in, and achieving a 4-hour reduction every day through the summer months from 2 to 6 p.m. So it's for us, from my perspective as someone who is in the energy storage field every day, it has really driven interest in New York. It's driven a great number of conversations and activity, a lot of activity. So I guess I'd like to, from the panel, if you have comments about the program, things that you've seen when you've looked at it. In some ways, it certainly is a very strong program. I think it will certainly achieve the goal of having a number of energy storage systems sited in New York. And there's always details to these programs. So in the implementation, I think there are probably going to be challenges as things move forward. I will say I think that Con Ed and the City of New York have been great partners in working through those details. But I'd love to hear, the panel, you've had some experience, and Chelle, Brian.
I can start. Currently, Fiamm has been focusing on California market mostly, but we have heard about how do you call the program, the incentive program in New York? So this kind of tells me I'm not so familiar. We are not so familiar with the program yet.
We'll talk about it.
So from the vendor, what I want to tell you is from vendor perspective, it's not so clear how to what kind of procedure we have to follow to have a proper qualification to have for our product to prove that our battery system or the energy storage system as a turnkey is safe to operate indoor application. So I wish there is a more clear guideline for that.
I will let the battery folks talk about all the building code issues. I'll talk more about just the revenues. So one thing is Constellation really supports deregulated markets, and we built this distributed generation business without incentives, right? So we think there's an opportunity regardless of incentives. That said, incentives are definitely going to drive early adopters and help us pick the markets we're going to focus on. So the fact that these incentives exist makes New York one of our target markets for implementing and deploying storage projects. Our model is to put all the money up front to buy the battery, install it, take the project risk, technology risk, price risk, and incentive risk associated with that project, so it's easier for the customer to adopt. What we're finding is, as a lot of people have said, obviously the devil's in the details, but the incentive may actually be better to take the DR enablement incentive rather than the storage incentive. And I'm happy to get into the weeds if you want and talk with anybody about that, but the demand response revenues are so strong in New York City. They are, just to give you perspective, depending on how you participate in different programs, they are on par with the PJM frequency regulation revenues that have gotten everybody so excited. So we're doing the math, and it will probably depend customer by customer, battery technology by battery technology, which way we go. But I would just flag that as something that, it's actually a nice option that we have both from NYSERDA.
Okay. So the DR is 800 per, is the...
Yep. So the DR enablement is 800 per kW with a cap of 75% of the project cost, an important detail, versus 50% of the project cost on the storage. And then the other, just for people's background, the demand response revenues can be over $300,000 per megawatt year if you're in multiple programs in the right zones in New York City.
I think the interesting part from our point of view is that we're talking about 4 hours of storage. A lot of the early interest in storage was because of so-called power applications. These are things like frequency regulation and voltage support. So you're looking at energy duration of less than an hour, maybe half an hour. For peak mitigation, you're looking in some cases up to 12 hours, but most of the time 4 to 6 hours. And you do really require a different type of technology for that. One of the advantages of the flow type of battery, which is what American Vanadium has evolved in, is that you can independently scale power and energy. So we certainly see that the interest in a 4-hour duration does help us. Okay. Yeah, the 4-hour application certainly does allow us to focus on those longer term applications. That isn't to say we can't do the shorter term applications as well, but it does allow us to allow interest to be diverted to those long duration applications. And I think we'll see a number of new technologies that are applicable to those type of long durations get accelerated into the marketplace.
Well, I suppose the interest I have is on the way that these technologies could be integrated to deliver that response during those 4 hours. So I think there are some principles there that are sort of best practice, but it's implementing something that's not just a kind of one-stop shop from the distribution company's perspective. So you put something in place that has some element of future-proofing in terms of the controls available or the services that you may be able to derive from that in the future, but importantly maintaining visibility of that asset, understanding how effective it's been at achieving that peak reduction, and then thinking about how you plan the distribution system moving forward with something like that embedded within it is quite new. And the tools are emerging for those things, but it is kind of early days. In the UK, there's been historically we have a lot of electric water heating in the north of Scotland, and the scheduling of that, the tele-switching of that has delivered huge benefit for peak reduction. One company estimates £700 million of asset deferral through that. So I'm really interested to see how it all gets integrated.
I think that's a great lead to the next area I wanted to explore a little bit with regulatory frameworks. And many of you may be familiar that New York State recently kicked off a proceeding, called the Reforming the Energy Vision, or REV. It's a public service commission proceeding. It is a look at the distribution system of New York State and the policies and the rate structures that accompany that system, and really pulling it apart and looking at it as a set of transactions. And in fact, sort of a centerpiece of the vision for the outcome of this process is the creation of something called the Distribution System Platform Provider, which effectively is an operator for the distribution side of the grid, much the way the New York ISO operates the bulk power side. So the net result of this for things like distributed resources like storage is one of the goals that typically when you go to a storage conference, someone will say the words, what we want to do is get multiple revenue streams. We want to have the system provide different services and get paid many times, get paid for all of the things that it does. And typically the regulatory environments don't allow for that. So I think when you look at the REV proceeding, one of the goals is to make sure that things get properly compensated for what they do and when they do it. And so storage certainly stands to come to the forefront and to be paid well in that event. So I think, some of you I know have been involved in the REV process. It's a massive undertaking. If any of you are involved, there must be 20 working groups and subgroups that have been set up, and they have a short time frame. And so there's a huge level of activity around this in the state right now. But I think it'd be interesting, actually whether you've been directly involved or not, to hear some commentary about things that work and don't work from a regulatory perspective. So where should the value? How should the grid compensate storage? And I know that's a huge question, but I'd love to just pick some examples of where you see it working, and maybe if you have an example where it doesn't work, that would be instructive.
Okay. Well, you use the term multiple revenue streams, and one of the reasons we have to use multiple revenue streams is because it's new technology, and usually new technologies have a high initial cost. So we always look to gather revenue streams, for those things to be identified, then you do need an unbundled type of regulatory environment. And I think that's why you see storage finding a foothold in California and in New York, and to some extent in Texas, as we see a lot of those services get unbundled. And I think that's where the regulators certainly are showing a lot of interest in how do we actually promote storage. Storage has been on the fringes for the last, I guess I've been involved in this industry for 7 years in the US, and storage has been very interesting. Everybody thought it was great, but nobody ever figured out how you wrote the check for a storage project. And it wasn't really until California mandated 1.3 gigawatts of storage on their system that somebody said, oh, we can put it in the rate base. And now you've got a mechanism. I mean, we always knew the ratepayer was going to pay, but we didn't know what the mechanism was. And now we have a mechanism. It's going to go into the rate base, and so storage projects are starting to proliferate. And just a little diversion on the regulatory environment, there needs to be a coincident effort on the interconnection of storage, because that can be a very big bottleneck. You'll get far more applications for storage than interconnection applications can handle. So that needs to be watched as we go forward.
Yeah, I add a couple of things that I totally agree. And one of the things we've been thinking about is if you're going to enable multiple revenue streams, it sort of implies multiple control options or visibility of those multiple control options. You need to be able to validate that something is doing what it's supposed to do and be able to audit that. And importantly, if that is going to change over time, then how does that impact on the performance of the asset? So does that degrade the battery in some way or have some impact on its life? What's the value of that? Is it worth it? And therefore, how do you continue to factor that into the ongoing, it's connected to what is a finite system. A lot of the exchange of energy at a market level makes some kind of assumption about the network, the underlying network. But if we're looking at REV and thinking about the animation of all these different parts of the supply chain, then it's going to have to be more reflective of the local distribution system. And that's much more, many more nodes in the network, much more complexity, much more new data that's going to evolve quickly. So.
I just want to add a few more comments from a little different angle. 3 weeks ago, I was in San Francisco to attend a CPUC hearing relating to Track 4 decision in California. Actually, I'm not exaggerating. I was at the meeting room, and there were about 50 to 60 people sitting there from different industry to participate in the Track 4 decision. We spent about nearly 2 hours to discuss how to define storage. 2 hours, I'm not exaggerating. This is true. The reason is because the moderator from CPUC, he said that storage system can be just anything, any device that can help energy efficiency and help reducing the peak demand. And some of the audience said, then what about water heater? you can heat up the water during the peak time, and that will certainly contribute to reduce the peak time when you have to take a shower during the peak time, right? So, and that subject gets extended longer and longer in larger perspective, and then it turns out battery storage system is not no longer only a storage system, but it can be also defined as an advanced generator. So how to define this battery storage system and also energy storage system? Some people may think that they're the same subject, but they are not. But it's not necessarily true, especially in California. So I don't know what's the policy, what's the discussion is going on in your committee group. I would be very interested to hear more detail.
I'll echo that. So defining storage as generation has lots of implications. And I guess what I would argue is, I would question is, can we actually let it be more than one thing? So if you say the use case is this, it's storage. And if the use case is this, it is not, it's generation, it is not a generation asset. That would probably open up a lot more opportunities and make things cleaner. As long as you've got clarity on the rules and there's checks and balances of when you get classified which, that might be the best solution for building out the storage business. The other thing kind of related to that is, when do you really need interconnection? I certainly understand all the concerns that go along with that, but there are enough systems in the way you size it that you could protect the system, or at least mitigate the interconnection complications. The other thing that's come up is, again, depending on how you classify the resource, are you going to be liable for paying standby charges for your battery? And how does that change the economics? And there's a lot of other precedents there. This is, again, is your battery looking like a CHP system, and therefore there's a justification for standby charges, meaning it's carrying base load, or not. So those are some of the things that are really impacting the economic models, the risk that's out there, and customer decisions. So to the extent that we can get clarity on that or mitigate that risk, that will certainly accelerate contracts and sales.
Thanks. I think just picking up on a couple of points there. If you think of the grid when it first stood up, when we first had an electrical grid, you had a generator, a set of wires, and a load. And all of the infrastructure, all of the regulatory framework around that, all of the payment schemes had that basic concept in mind. And when you put something on the end out here that is both load and it sometimes looks like a generator, so you've got bidirectional flow, it really kind of upsets the apple cart. Right? You're putting something there that wasn't postulated when the rules were set up. So I think you get artifacts like, in fact, I'm looking at Brian Caruso is here from AES. One of their projects in Texas had to apply to be interconnected, had to be both generator and load. So they had to apply twice for the interconnection, simply because it acts as those two things at different times. And then you go to the actual application of rates in these instances, and it's not, that's my phone, right? Sorry. But it's not obvious, even to the project developers at some points, what happens when you apply things like standby rates. I know of an instance here in the city where a project was being installed, and Con Ed did an analysis of the load and the size of the battery and said, you're subject to standby rate. You're not exempt you're not a renewable, you're not exempt from standby charges, so we're going to apply this rate. And the initial response was, we don't want that, and so they filed a petition to have it dismissed. What happened when they sat down with a rate specialist at Con Ed was they learned, look, in this instance for this project, it actually works better to have a standby rate. So the structure isn't in place yet to completely give you a crystallized view of how storage applies in different instances. I think I want to pick up on the theme of some of the RFPs that are out there and opportunities for storage. There have been quite a number. LIPA issued a solicitation last year. A number of responses are under review at this point. Southern Cal Edison, out in California, also the Imperial Irrigation District, Hawaii, there have been a number of solicitations. And I'm sure that many of you have looked at those and considered participating. I'd like to hear, if you're seeing themes emerge about where storage is being applied first, or what kinds of services it's being asked to perform. I know there's a span, but I think hearing some detail about what you've seen people asking for in terms of storage would be helpful.
I think the RFP, not HECO, but there was one before from Hawaii for large-scale storage RFP. That was one of the very first RFP that I have ever seen. Because that RFP has the very thorough technical guidance in terms of technical requirements, and also it has very particular requirements for PPA. I think the PPA is getting more popular among utilities because it's very convenient for them, right? They don't have to be concerned with the liability issue. They just go to one vendor, one contractor, and the contractor take care of everything, right? But from vendor perspective, such as Fiamm, we have a concern because American Vanadium just commented earlier, we are all startup company in storage market. Therefore, the initial cost of this technology, regardless of chemistry, is somewhat high. It's always typically higher than what a utility company and end users would expect. But we are in already a commodity market, right? But from vendor perspective, our question is how you can quantify the benefits of safety, right? From vendor perspective, we always make sure every component, every electronics is perfectly engineered so that there is no external causes failure, right? And there are certain things that vendors can improve on the chemistry level. But all these are added cost. But from vendor perspective, I think in the current market, I don't think there is no good algorithm that evaluates these different value drivers.
This is not an RFP, but I'll just give an example of a deal that keeps coming across our wholesale group's desk. So there are some developers in the Illinois ComEd territory that want to put in a 60 megawatt battery installation for frequency regulation. And the missing piece, not surprisingly, is they need somebody to do a contract for differences to bear the price risk on the frequency response or frequency regulation revenues. But there's no RFP for that. That's just a enterprising developer trying to make that happen.
Well, we have responded, I think, to most of the RFPs that John mentioned in various ways. I think as a vendor, you can spend a lot of time and resources answering RFPs. So we've tended to follow a different path and partnered with developers and integrators who are also responding to those RFPs. But it is interesting to watch the evolution of requirements. One that springs to mind immediately is the current HECO, Hawaii Electric Company's RFP, which calls for 30-minute duration. But HECO's main problem is that they've got too much solar on the island. And there is about a 4 to 6 hour difference between the solar peak and the load peak. So it would seem to me that 30 minutes isn't really going to cut it. It's going to solve some of the problems, but not all of the problems. So I think that's just an example that the industry is growing and learning, and it's our job to do some of the educating. But what I think is interesting is those RFPs are out. They're on the street, and we would like to see the type of response that's being made to those. It was rather interesting earlier this year when Southern Cal Edison came out with their initial auction. The immediate response from those people receiving the submissions was how many they received. No mention of whether they were good, bad, or indifferent. It was just, wow, we got a lot of answers here, over 500 replies. So it'd be interesting to see what the level of response was like. But the fact that they exist obviously helps the market grow.
Just that, in that vein, actually, some of the things that we've been looking at or been talking to people about is the frequency and magnitude of the events that the storage would be targeted at. So whether it's it's about wind energy or solar energy, it's trying to get a feeling and an understanding for the broad range of response characteristics that you require from energy storage, and that is not necessarily a simple task. So in some of our work, we've been looking at 15-minute periods and what that means in terms of impacts on batteries and their performance. But also interestingly, these issues are not necessarily daily events that some of these batteries are being implemented for. So it's what do you do with them when they're not doing that, even if that's their primary driver, and having some kind of secure way of allowing them to participate in other sorts of services, and being very clear on when they're doing one or the other. And that's the kind of stuff we've been looking at.
Yeah, I think that's a great vision. In this market, certainly the value of resiliency or some backup power is apparent to anyone who suffered through outages post-Sandy, say, but the way to value that from a grid payment stream is not obvious. And so it's one of those sort of baked-in values that maybe doesn't get compensated easily. But again, it's one of the things that storage can do. I'd like to actually open to questions from the audience at this point. Wow. Right here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm David Hughes from Rutgers University. I have a rather naive question. You're all talking about batteries or thermal storage, which are very concentrated forms. One of the Canary Islands is going to go 100% wind on their grid, and during the nighttime or during the daytime, they're going to pump water up the ridge and let it fall at night to generate hydro. The equivalent project in New York would be to pump water up the Palisades from the Hudson and let it fall at night. And that takes a lot of space and so on. And it's not concentrated, it's not batteries. Are any of your companies or anybody thinking about a larger scale, more landscape level storage of energy?
I can say something about that. One wind farm developer we've been working with has quite a significant head of water on a river next to their site. So they are actually looking at implementing a pumped hydro scheme just to balance their output on site. That is in the north of Scotland, where it is extremely windy. One of their wind turbines is I think it was the highest performing wind turbine in the world 2 years ago. It achieved 64% capacity load factor. So the revenue opportunities for them are, outrageous, basically. So yes, we're looking at that, and a lot of experience with pumped hydro in Europe, obviously, and the UK system actually, if it all goes down, it starts again at a pumped hydro station in Scotland. So it's playing into the market currently already.
Yeah. Just on that vein, there are compressed air storage projects. They tend to be big, and they tend to be very difficult to permit. First of all, you've got to find a cabin that you can do it, and then you've got to worry about the technology. Are you using BTUs to heat the air as you expand it, and things of that nature. But yeah, there are other storage technologies. It's just that for pumped hydro, it's obviously limited by topography, and it tends to be centralized storage. Usually, because you're dealing with storage, you want it to be used in the most effective manner. And the most effective use of storage is to put it closer to the load. Now, obviously, the closer you get to the load, the more expensive is real estate. So there is a trade-off somewhere on the type of technology, its cost, and the type of application that it meets.
Could you talk in general, if we can go back to batteries for a second, or similar types of storage. What's your sense of how the market is evolving as far as being a demand response object, i.e. dispatched perhaps several times a year, usually in the summer, versus something that would be used, say, every day for permanent load shifting? Because especially in New York, we're subject to minimum demand charges, and so anything you can do to reduce that peak can be often extremely price competitive. Do you have any thoughts or sense on that?
Yes, certainly. John raised it when he started. He said, in general, energy use is declining because of our energy efficiency measures over the past several years, but demand charges are increasing. And so we get that that non-linear look of the demand curve where you're just trying to meet the peak for a short period of time. But that's where all your capital investment is. And so if you can do anything to shave that peak, defer the capital expense or whatever, then that does really talk to a daily cycling of the system. And that's where, we use the term multiple revenue streams, but they don't have to be multiple all at the same time. But you can, for instance, size your system that it has some UPS functionality. So it's got maybe 4 or 6 or 8 hours. Then you can look at, are you peak shifting? And are you also doing some of that shorter term stuff? And then if it's got UPS functionality, it has black start capability. And so when the grid does go down, it can be used for that sort of resiliency.
Is the battery chemistry conducive to something to be used every day for many years on end?
Oh, yes. And that's interesting enough. That's part of the debate that's going on now. New York City is full of lead-acid batteries, but they're full of lead-acid batteries for standby duties. They're not full of lead-acid batteries designed to cycle daily. But a lot of the new technologies can do that sort of things, but they're not in the building code. And so that's why we're there. I'll show you my scars later on. That's why we're there going through this review process, because the city is aware that the code obviously follows practice. You can't write a code and hope practice will follow. You have to have the code to follow practice. So that's to their benefit and their credit. They are looking at what's necessary to get these new technologies into the buildings.
I'll answer from a non-technical angle. So having been in this business for all of 3 months, with a very big bias of coming from demand response, what I discovered is a lot of the companies that have had the most sales are really focused on the California and upcoming New York incentives that are very demand charge management focused. And that in general, I would say most storage companies haven't yet factored in the opportunities for demand response. And if you think about just 5 years down the road where storage could be, I can promise you, having tried to convince buildings to change their temperature set points, retailers to change their lighting, it is a lot easier to say, put in this battery for demand response than it is change your behaviors, change your core business. So I think there's a lot of upside in figuring that out, and I don't think the industry is there yet. There are some companies everybody's trying to get there, but I don't think it's factored into the upside really yet.
Besides reducing the peak demand usage, I don't know how many of you actually take a close look at your energy bill. Actually, utility, another way of their making money is making more tiers. So that, so for example, let's say I used 22 kilowatt hour today, and last year I used 19 kilowatt hour. This year I may pay a lot more than last year, even though 1922, the difference may be very small, but the difference in terms of the bill amount may be substantial. This is not really. This is not necessarily related to the peak power usage, but the tier program. So, so adding battery system to existing local grid or in-house can certainly provide the flexibility.
Got a question back here. This is Brian with AES. Could you talk a little bit about storage duration when you're working with utilities and looking at the fundamentals of the market? What is the need they're looking for in terms of duration? In New York, we know it's 4 hours, and there's sort of discussion in PJM. Demand response is 6 or 10. In other markets, you see different. California is looking at 2. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with duration and the fundamentals of the demand curve?
So in California, there are two durations that the battery company is closely watching. One is called flexible capacity, and the other one is standard capacity. The flexible capacity is for 3 hours, and the standard capacity refers to 4+ hour applications. So in California, the trend is there is no longer very short-term, short-duration batteries. It's typically just 3 or 4. It's getting, it's a lot longer than the previous RFPs that we have seen so far.
John, you may remember that at your conference, I think it was earlier this year, one of the speakers, I think it was from DMV, really made a point that there is a trend towards longer-term duration, not to replace short-term duration, but to join alongside it, where in the past the discussion was all around frequency regulation and short-term applications. And he went to great lengths to say, I'm not saying it's being replaced, it's not a new trend, it's an additional trend. So we are seeing requirements for 4 to 6 hours, and I think that is a reflection of the high penetration of solar systems on some of the distribution feeders, where they really have to curtail because they can't take all of that energy during the peak period.
Just saying, but as I said before earlier, a lot of our projects we're looking at half-hourly periods throughout a day and then trying to fit that to some semblance of an acceptable cycle, which depends on the technology that's being used. But one of the requirements that have been placed on the batteries sometimes vary quite quickly, which by quickly I mean over a year or two. The growth of micro-generation, small-scale generation, changed some of the load profiles significantly in an unexpected way in the UK, in one project, for example, in the UK. And that impacted on how the battery would be used and how long it was needed for. And that's just a good example of how this is sometimes a bit of a moving target.
So we have time for one more question. Down here at the front. Oh, yep, here.
A comment that was made earlier that I thought was really interesting was, as you get closer to the load, the real estate gets more expensive. As batteries start scaling up, what are your thoughts of where the majority of batteries are going to be placed?
My answer is obviously biased because they'll be placed where we'd like to see them, and which is, I think, around the substation level and maybe in a sort of community level. Our technology is not really suitable at this stage for residential, although there are residential type of applications out there. But I think in order to have reliable storage technology that you can be confident of, you probably want to consolidate maybe some of the load, and so community scale I think we'll see, and as we get the proliferation of microgrids, then I think that will also be at that substation level, and not necessarily when we talk about grid scale. We used to be talking about putting lots of megawatts on the transmission system, but now when we talk grid scale, we're also talking microgrid scale. And to really have a well-performing microgrid that has solar and wind and maybe biofuels really needs some storage to even out the intermittencies in some of those energy sources.
I think this question is somewhat related to the first question that the gentleman asked earlier. There is no one chemistry that fits all application. That is the reason why we see so many different chemistries, so many different type of battery technologies in the market. And those different battery technology requires a certain form factor in terms of how to properly store the batteries. For instance, some batteries has to be stored in isolated and somewhat far from the load locations due to safety concerns. And some people, some battery technologies just do not care, such as lithium can be a perfect example for that. But there is always pros and cons. So it really depends on the locations of the installation and also the applications.
I'll just add that I think one thing that's going to determine that may not be the technology or the cost of real estate, but what's available in terms of project financing. And if you look at what's happened in the solar industry and how fast the growth curve increased once there was project financing available, and everybody in the solar industry wants to jump on board the storage bandwagon. If you bring that model to storage, you may find the adoption moves a lot faster on the behind-the-meter side than the grid scale side.
Good point. I just wanted to follow, Jay, your comment. We had a very battery-centric kind of conversation here. There are a number of technologies that all serve the purpose of energy storage, from pumped hydro, the question, but also things like ultracapacitors that are very good at delivering a lot of power in a very short time and have certain places where they have that application works well. You also see flywheels, similarly, a lot of power in a short duration. And importantly, thermal storage. There are a lot of thermal storage projects here in the city that are providing long duration, 12-hour kind of service day in and day out. So there's a mix of technologies, and I think part of the answer to the questions about what's going to sort of win out, my sense is there's going to be a mix. I think that we'll continue to see a mix of technologies in the market that serve different power and energy requirements and siting requirements. So some kind of a matrix that's going to come out of that has a whole range of opportunities. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eric Davis, and I'm the research manager at EnerKnol. I'd like to first thank John and the panel for a great discussion. Let's give them a round of applause. I'd also like to thank again our founding partner, NYSERDA, and this year's sponsors, Breitling Energy, Con Edison, Fiamm, and American Vanadium. And without your support, this week's events would not be possible. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to thank the NYC EDC and the Urban Future Lab and NYC Acre for not only hosting this event, but your continued support of EnerKnol and New York Energy Week. So with that, I'd like to now invite everyone to stick around, meet the panelists, ask some more great questions, and also meet the EnerKnol team and fellow incubator attendants just outside this room. So thank you all for coming.